morning. Welcome to WishwaTalks. My name is Mani. Today's WishwaTalks is brought to you in partnership with Teacher Plus, a monthly magazine aimed at teachers of the education community. Discuss ideas, share and update knowledge. We have two speakers today. First up is Usha Raman. And those of you who are regular attendees of WishwaTalks would have heard us speak on our platform before. Usha Raman is a professor at the Department of Communication, University of Hyderabad, and the editor of Teacher Plus. She's a professor of media studies, where she teaches and researches in the areas of digital culture, health communication, and journalism pedagogy. She's a columnist for the Hindu Sunday magazine and has published widely on topics related to education, health, and women's issues. Our second speaker today is Devina Sarwatay, who is a senior research fellow, UGC NET, and PhD student in the Department of Communication, Hyderabad University. She researches young people and social media under the guidance of Professor Usha Raman. She's a graduate student member at the Media Education Lab, Harrington School of Communication and Media, the University of Rhode Island, USA, and a member of Future of ICA Conferences Task Force at the International Communication Association. Before we get started, I would like to inform you that our speakers will be taking questions from you after the main talk. So please raise a hand or leave your questions in the chat and we will address them. Now, without further ado, if I may please ask our speakers to start today's Vishwa Talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mani, and thanks to WishwaTalks and particularly Shrivani for this collaboration. It's always a pleasure to be here. And so before we begin our talk, I'd just like to spend a few seconds telling you about this 30-plus-year-old magazine that I've been running with a very, very small team. We call it a forum for the contemporary teacher, but really it's also for parents and anyone interested in education. It's a monthly magazine and comes chock full of ideas, debates, experiences, perspectives, basically everything to do with child education. So do take a look, and if you're inclined to subscribe, it's a very small community, but a vibrant community of ideas. So now to the matter at hand. Devina and I are delighted to be able to talk to you about a topic we've been thinking about, researching and writing about for a few years now, and something that's become a subject of collective concern in recent times. Those darn screens, right? And we're looking at them right now. So people of all ages, from as young as 2 or maybe even younger to as old as 90 and more, are increasingly spending much of their time looking at screens, like right now. Before we get into our presentation, I'd like to evoke a disclaimer from all the adults attending this meeting. If you have a smartphone with an app that allows you to track your own screen time, do take a look at what you're doing on the phone. Store that information away and we'll come back to it later. And another disclaimer, or perhaps I should call it packing away the elephant in the room. When we talk about screens or digital devices or the internet, we're fully aware that the digital divide, that much of we say does not apply to all people, but it is worth noting that close to 2/3 of the world's population is now connected to some degree, a number that will increase significantly in the coming years. The average time spent online by those with access is 170 minutes per day, close to 3 hours. And my guess is that in some groups, like many of us on this Zoom call, we spend many more hours engaging with our devices, whether we're online or offline. Again, recall those details from your phone's tracker. And while we worry about our own dependence on screens and get anxious about what it is doing to our eyes and our brains and even our fingers, that worry is much more pronounced when we think about our children. How are their pliable minds being affected by these luminescent devices? What forces lurk behind those windows and on those multiple open tabs? What does it mean for them to be constantly typing away, swiping away, clicking away on those devices? These are big questions about causes and effects, about use and impact, and we're not going to be presenting any definitive answers here. Instead, what we will do is a bit of reflecting and a lot of thinking aloud about how we might understand these issues. So let me just give you an overview of the talk. and how we've structured it. So we're going to begin by talking about what we call techno panics. And basically, it's a big word for something that we all feel. Techno panic is basically this anxiety we feel every time there's a new technology that enters our world, right? And Devina will explain more about it. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll move on to trying to understand from the current state of research, how we think about screen time, what are the scholars saying about our interaction with social media and about technology in general, and what these practices mean particularly for children. And we'll try and think about what this has meant for us before the pandemic. There's been a huge change in our relationship with the internet and with digitality during the pandemic. And now that we've come out or are in the process of coming out of the pandemic, how are we going to recalibrate that relationship with screens? And then we'll end with a set of key takeaways. But of course, as I said in the beginning, none of this is set in stone. We're learning about things as we go along. So we really, we're looking forward to what you have to say as well. So now over to Devina, who will take us through the slides, and then I'll come back at the end. Devina?
Thank you so much. So as Usha Ma'am has already set the stage, we're going to take a quick look at what it means, this word technopanics. Well, if we look at the official definition, which a research scholar has come up with, said scholar called Alice Norwick, she defines technopanics as the moral panics about technology use, especially the use made by children. And these panics are usually by adults. So they're worried about how it is that children are accessing these sort of technologies, what are their uses, what are their practices, what are their experiences. They're worried in case they're spending too much time on these technologies, on these screens. They're worried if they are coming across some content which might not be meant for them. And they're worried about what it means and what these socializations will do to their children. That essentially is what it means. But is this new? It's not new at all. Ever since technology, information, communication, media have existed, there's always been a new panic about a new technology that has come to the fore. For example, in my doctoral research, when I was talking to people who were involved with thinking about children and media, working with children and media directly or indirectly, one of my experts told me during an interview that they were a very avid reader when they were a child. They would often bring their book to the dinner table and get scolded by their parents for reading while they were eating. And of course, everyone around them used to tell them, oh, your eyes will go bad. Oh, you're not paying attention to what you're eating. Neither are you reading properly, nor are you eating properly. Do one thing at a time. Oh, you're addicted to books. And that's, I think, a common theme with any new technology that comes up. And that's one fear that a lot of us have, not just for ourselves, but also for young people, children and adolescents, that are they addicted to these new technologies? That's a huge part of our anxieties, our panics regarding technologies. So whether it's entertainment media or whether it's mass media, remember how people used to say the same thing about television? Oh, if you sit too close to the TV, your eyesight will go bad. Oh, you're wasting your time on the television. Oh, you're watching garbage. Might as well sit and study instead. And now all of those debates, all of those anxieties, panics have come to our screens, which have become even more personalized because we have smartphones, we have our own tablets, we have our own laptops, and we have access to so much more content because we now have access to social media. It's not just about the access that we have to content made by others, It also has to do with how much content we are making as adults or as children and adolescents through social media platforms and applications like Snapchat, WhatsApp, Facebook, TikTok, which is unfortunately or fortunately for some people banned in India right now. But these are thoughts and anxieties and panics and worries that a lot of adults, whether they are teachers or whether they are parents or other adult caregivers, have for their children who are around them, who are growing, adolescents who are learning new things and picking up new things. And more often than not, riddle me this, aren't you wondering if a new trend or a new filter is something that's on your child's mind, and you realize, is this something that's important or is it frivolous? Is it something that's fun or should they rather be studying instead? What we mean by screen time essentially is how much time are you spending on screens? Not just one device, but across devices. So whether they are your personalized mobile phones, smartphones, or your tablets, laptops, or slightly more commonly placed, say, home computers or school computers, or if they are your TVs, any and every screen around you contributes to the screen time that you're using on a daily basis. Now, the question is it important how much time you're spending on those screens? Of course it is. Is it also important what you're doing in the time that you're spending on those screens? I think even more so. So recently, the NCPCR, which is the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, ran a survey while we are in a pandemic about what children are doing with mobile phones and other devices with internet access, given that, to quote Professor Sonia Livingston, who's also a great scholar in this particular research area, digital by default. Our education has gone online, our entertainment has gone online, our engagement in social relationships and keeping in touch with family and friends has gone online. So what has happened? That's what they're trying to find out. So they ran a survey across India to try and figure out how children are using their mobile phones with internet. Of course, most of them said that they are using these devices and the internet for online classes. But another question that they asked the children was, what do you enjoy doing most with these devices and the internet? And they said chatting. And one of the notes that the research team made was, maybe we need to kind of figure out how to control screen time. But think a little bit about this. Children haven't been able to go to school as they, well, quote unquote, normally could. They haven't been able to go out and play. They haven't been able to socialize. Is it such a surprise that they want to chat and that they enjoy chatting while they're stuck at home? They might not always want to only chat with their parents and siblings, am I right? So what we're going to do is just run a quick poll. The question is, what bothers you most about children's use of social media? And you could pick any one of the options. Do you think it is a waste of time? Children are wasting time on social media? Do you think it might be unsafe for children? Maybe they come across content that's not meant for them on social media. Do you believe it could be addictive? Children might love spending time on social media because it triggers certain response? Or do you think it makes them antisocial? Which is actually a line that my parents throw at me as well. Why do you spend so much time on your devices?
Yeah, so even if we say, okay, close to 65% of people have answered who are in this room. And it looks like at this point, the third option, which is it is addictive, is the biggest fear. And I think it might be useful at some point in this conversation to think through what we mean by addiction and why it has such a bad rap, right? I mean, what are the imaginations of this word addictive that make us afraid of it? So do we want to move on? I think we have, yeah, great.
I'm just ending the poll. Yeah. Yes. I wonder if addiction, if we ask this question to children, would get translated into interest or passion. So maybe think about it. If I were to host the same poll to children, asking them why do they love social media so much, do you think they would have very different responses? And do you think that that framing might help you understand that, okay, maybe they are interested or passionate about something, but I feel like it's an addiction because they're spending so much time on it? Maybe because I imagine that following a trend or replicating something that's going on in social media, like a reel, is frivolous, but maybe they're just doing it for fun. Maybe they're learning something, who knows? Another thing that we wanted to ask you was about technology, because these days children are surrounded by technologies. It's not just the things that I've already mentioned, which is mobile phones, laptops, television, but also other devices like your home assistants, for example, Alexa, for example, or Echo. There's another poll that we have for you where we want to ask, what do you think about children's use of technology? Do you think it is, you know, a necessary evil? Do you think it should be restricted as much as possible? Do you feel that it should be monitored at all times? Because we are the adults and we should monitor what our children are doing, keep them safe? Or do you think too much of technology might just keep them from developing important social skills?
Maybe we should have had a fifth option, which is all of the above. So if you think it's all of the above, you can just put it in the chat.
I do imagine that this question might have received very different responses pre-pandemic. Now that we have online classes, all those schools are beginning to reopen now. I suppose the answer, it is necessary in these times, is sort of gaining. Although it's not quite as polarized as the last one, we have a mix of also that it should be monitored at all times, as well as that it might just keep them from developing important social skills. So I'm going to end this poll now. Thank you so much. We had nearly 60% of participation from the audience, and this is really interesting for us. Maybe you could also drop a line in the chat. Tell us your thoughts about what your answer would be pre-pandemic. Would you still consider it necessary?
Increasing the call. Okay.
Right. Now, these are thoughts that people have had regarding children's media practices since a very long time, since before digital and social media. And one of the things that we need to understand is maybe the best bet would be to, if they are younger children, do everything with them, which is what one of my participants told me, that if I am worried about what my child is doing on their screen or otherwise, I follow this very simple direction that my pediatrician gave me, which is just go do everything with them, which is a very, sometimes, for lack of a better word, condescending, sleep when your child sleeps. So that, but she's kind of taken that advice quite literally, and she does everything with her child. So she reads when her child is reading, she plays with the child when she's playing. She's also using her phone with the child when the child is using the phone. Slightly older children, maybe it could be possible to have a conversation with them. What is it that you enjoy doing on social media? What is it that you spend so much time on that particular screen for? And understand what it is that they like doing, and how is it that they frame their own experiences and practices on social media. For even older children still, maybe it would be a good idea to enable and empower them to feel like they can talk to you about anything. Because at the end of the day, it might be too difficult to monitor everything. Parents have too many things to do, right? So maybe it's about sitting down at the dinner table and saying, so how was your day today? And maybe adding a question, so what did you do online today? The pre-pandemic scenario has always been about these endless debates on how screen time is bad for children versus there's little evidence that screen time is bad for children, and experts have always been polarized. However, co-pandemic, people have said the children have very little choice in the matter. And one of the scholars that I mentioned has a very interesting video, which I'm going to play here. Just give me a second. He's trying to answer the question raised here. Is screen time a good way to keep track of kids' online activity? Let's hear what she has to say.
No, absolutely not. People have been moving away from screen time it's just so crude. It doesn't tell you anything about what is the content or the mode of engagement. But parents, they get all these instructions and they are told, completely contradictory. Limit it, but get your child ahead of the digital world. So they are stuck in a world of contradiction.
And this kind of gives me the opportunity to ask all of you here, whether you're teachers or whether you're parents or uncles and aunts or older siblings, do you think the same thing applies to you? Are you constantly conflicted about what to do with screen time and social media in children? Because on one hand, they love it, they learn from it. On the other hand, it might also be addictive, might be a waste of time, might make them antisocial. I'm sorry. Now, we've already started thinking about what it means for children and screen time and social media post-pandemic. And we had certain reports by the government of India as well as other research bodies internationally who've started thinking about what it means for the future of education if things are going hybrid or things are going online. And these are some of the things that people have thought through. So we have certain guidelines for digital education, where they're trying to find ways in which we navigate through a world which might be new for many adults, but a world that is so common and so lived in for the children because they were born with this technology around them. And with that, I think it's so Usha want to take over.
Wow, that was faster than I expected. But yes, thanks, Devina. I mean, that was a very quick snapshot, right? And whole symposia organized around this issue of screen time and screen practices and how do we think about it? How do we manage it? Because theoretically, it seems like, okay, like somebody, Akriti just mentioned in the chat, the ideal balance is giving children the skills, but also allowing them access to the online world. So clearly, we're living through transformative times, and maybe that's kind of a facile description because everybody thinks that their times are transformative, right? So I'm sure, like Devina explained, when cinema entered the fray, I'm sure people thought that this was a transformative technology, and it is both evil and it is good, and so on. But really, what has shifted today is that these small devices, things that we carry around in our pockets, along with this big thing called the cloud, they have built an interface between us and each other, and in fact, between us and the world. So it helps us to maybe break down our anxieties and think about them a little more carefully. How much does it have to do with our own fears and uncertainties about the world? And what are we actually projecting onto children? How much does it have to do with the technology itself? And how much is simply a function of stage of life, right? All parents worry, all children experiment, and in doing so, they learn about the world and how to live in it. So, here, what we've been talking about is digital technology, and the technology may be new, but the fears and the anxieties are mostly old. And just a quick look at history will tell you that the questions that we are raising now have been questions that we raised through the better part of the 20th century, ever since mass media came into being. And as Devina said, ever since books came into being. What is certain is that the world has changed, and it's not just to do with screens, right? So somehow our anxieties about the world in general, about the fact that there is inequity, there is climate change, there is environmental disaster, and then there are screens, and we're spending all our time on screens. So is there something more complicated than just the screen that we're worrying about? And then we focus on the screen as the big evil maybe that we should tackle, and not really thinking through where our anxiety is coming from. And as Devina pointed to, and as Sonia Livingston said, maybe what we need to focus on is not quantity, not how much time children are spending on screen, but what they are doing on screen and how they are doing it. And those are the literacies that we need to build in, right? I mean, how do you handle this world when you intervene in the world through a screen? So we need to be thinking about literacies in a different way. So clearly, all the answers that we may come up with may pertain to our lives, but in different contexts, the literacies may be different. So for a child who is battling for screen time, let's say in a household that has just one mobile phone, maybe the way we think about literacies and the way we think about screen time is very different from talking about a child who lives in a home with a smartphone, Alexa, a smartwatch, a personal tablet, a personal cell phone, and a desktop computer. And that child has access to all of these, right? So if the parent says you only have 30 minutes on your iPad, the child will easily skip to the smart TV and watch National Geographic on the smart TV. So, what is that all about? So clearly we have to have different approaches for different contexts, but at the base of it is critical literacies, thinking about, what are the skills we need to navigate the world. And the screen is only an interface with the world. So I think to kind of shift our attention from the screen itself to larger social, cultural, and critical skills. So I'd like to end actually with a quote again from Sonia Livingston. And she says, talk to your children to understand what they enjoy, how to get the most from the experience. Talk to them about what worries them and what to do if something goes wrong. And she continues by saying, be the person that your child wants to tell without fear of punishment if something upsets them online. Now, this advice is really not very different from general parenting advice, right? So again, to go back to that question about how much screen time is too much, there's no single answer, but clearly the answer lies in what is that screen time about, and what are the anxieties about? Is it about the screen or is it about something else? And maybe to attack that anxiety rather than the screen itself. So we'll stop there and take questions, comments from the audience, and experiences, of course.
Thank you so much, Usha ma'am, Devina ma'am. That was extremely insightful. And if I may add, yeah, the screen is only an instrument, right? How it is used It's entirely dependent on how we manage that time and use. I will hand it back to you, Usha ma'am, to take some question and answers. Please let me know if you need any help, but I think you should be self-sufficient.
I think we have a hand up. So maybe we can first take the live questions from the audience and then move to the chat if there are questions in the chat. So the hand that I can see up is from Anjali Lal Gupta. So Anjali, you want to unmute and ask your question?
Thank you, Dr. Raman. That was a great presentation by you and Devina. My observations are kind of similar to what you'd already said. I feel screen time and usage of internet by children is a mixed bag. And there is this variable of the family also. Not all families are functional families. You know, there's so many families that are dysfunctional. And going to the screen becomes like an escape route for the child. And also an option for, you know, honing their skills and finding friends. Of course, the dangers exist, but this is an option that children can exercise if the other situations in their life are not that great.
Yeah, that's really a good point. And in fact, something I did want to mention, and it just slipped away, was that, you know, there's no doubt that screens or digital life in general has been a huge boon, right? And now, in fact, we're talking about a different kind of digital divide, one where parents who are extremely wealthy, well-resourced, live in places with lots of healthy outdoors, you know, they can actually create an environment where their children are not dependent on screens for stimulation or for activity. But what if you live in a one-room home and you know, are surrounded, have no space, like Yashoda mentioned in the chat that her son doesn't play the gilli danda anymore. So I'm not sure what the context of her family is, but where are the spaces for gilli danda and where are the other children to play with, right? So then of course the screen and the life that it offers becomes a space for children who don't have the option of the real world. And similarly with education, now we all talk about how travel is such a great exposure, right? And how you should take time off from studies to go see the world. But then that means you have to have the resources to see the world. So, but a child can just as easily go on a virtual tour of the Andes or Kilimanjaro or anywhere else. So why would we want to deny that kind of experience to a child? So I think it is definitely a mixed bag. And one other thing I'd like to mention, which neither of us really touched on in the presentation, was the physiological harm. And again, there's no unequivocal research on this, but there are indications that, you know, there is something called dry eye, there is computer vision syndrome, there is, you know, cramps that people have in their hands because of using screens, and these are very real. So we need to find ways of mitigating those because, you know, there is no way of getting away from screens. So how do we create enough opportunities to mitigate the effects of screen time?
If I may just add to that a little bit, I imagine there are risks and opportunities just about everywhere, right? Even in the, I don't like the binary, but offline world, there are certain experiences that children and adolescents might have, which might not be pleasant, and they might learn something from those unpleasant experiences. Versus there might be other opportunities of collaboration, play, learning, etc., which are available in the offline world. So why is our thinking about the online world any different? Just like, I'm sorry again, the real world or the real life, there are risks and opportunities in the online life as well. I also kind of want to tip my hat to Professor Leila Green, who is part of the Centre, the Australian Research Council Centre for Excellence on the Digital Child, who says that I love technology, but I often find it difficult to use it, and I kind of want to figure out how to use it best. But when I see children, they have this sense of ease with which they use digital and social media, which I don't have. And maybe we kind of need to also keep that in consideration, that there are certain autodidactic skills that children and adolescents might have, which makes their experiences and practices online uh, kind of manageable for them. And they know that there are certain risks and opportunities that go with this access, use, etc. And they need to be careful about certain things.
I just wanted to also make a point in relation to one comment in the chat about screen time being bad for the eyes of children. And I mean, yes, staring at a luminescent object for any period of time is bad. And maybe it just occurred to me this morning that maybe these are cases for advocacy for better design, right? I mean, just like if you think about, if any of you are familiar with using the Kindle, when the first Kindles came out, they were pretty harsh on the eyes. And it was only over time that design of the technology changed. And then you came up with Paperwhite, which was non-reflective, and the glare was reduced considerably. And I think there have been similar movements with other screens as well, laptop screens, desktop screens, phone screens, but maybe not sufficiently, right? And maybe we need to advocate for better technology design that is healthier for our eyes. So yeah, that's something that's important to keep in mind.
Yes, and that sort of also kind of addresses the concern that people raised during the poll that social media is addictive. It is definitely addictive, and that is something that big tech or technology companies have to be mindful of. Similarly, they could, so like the design example that Usha ma'am gave, Tencent is a company in China which has a lot of gaming applications. And they've kind of figured out that it's important for children to only game a certain hours a day. So that's how those games are built. You can't access them beyond a certain number of hours. It just logs you off of the game. Maybe those are child-centered designs that social media companies or big tech companies could actually look into.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Vimla, I completely agree that, which is why I started out by saying we need to pack away the elephant in the room, right? And that elephant is partly about the digital divide, the fact that some people have access and many people don't. And that's everything that goes with it, right? I mean, do we have shared mobiles? Do we have individual mobiles? Do we have uninterrupted broadband, or do you have to buy data, per day? And even if you buy data per day, do you have like strong signal in your locality? So many issues that we've faced during the pandemic, right, in our classrooms, where remote learning was not equal. It showed us that it was not an equal world. So the inequalities that we see because of digitality are overlaid on existing inequalities. Absolutely no doubt about that. Yeah, and that brings up other sorts of issues, right? So a child who grows up comfortable with social media is going to be able to be comfortable in the metaverse, right? Because they've already thought about themselves as existing on social media in a particular way. Whereas a child, let's say, who comes into social media at age 14 or 15 is going to have the same kind of anxieties as a high schooler who switches schools and suddenly doesn't have a familiar peer group. So yeah, all of those things are important.
We also have a hand up from Ms. Sanya Nalian.
Yeah, good morning to the speakers. It was a very wonderful session, and I also I'm a professor at the Christ University, Bangalore, and I also have a very keen interest in some of my research is also on children's media practices, and that kind of is my conflict right now, right? In terms of at one level, scholarship and research is moving towards looking at the adversities of screen time and this over almost omnipotent presence of children and the digital together, like by default. But at the same time, there is also a very, very growing scholarship, especially in the UK and European countries, where actually now the digital and the children and the kind of literacies that are coming out of that engagement are actually very, very interesting, whether you look at the VR space, or whether you look at just storytelling for children in the digital world, or children themselves as storytellers in the digital world. And there is an excellent scholarship, and very, very large growing scholarship actually, including the digital child from Australia, that's actually been working on these things. So since we are from the subcontinent of India, and we're still kind of juggling between this, like my conflict always arises from when we start looking at research, or start looking at what are we talking about the child and the digital together in terms of media, where do we focus on? Because at one level we have a digital divide, which is at a very basic level of access to internet and access to things which can even be close to so-called education or learning. And at the same time, we have this abundance of availability of resources of any kind across platforms, right? So as much as we are digital India now, I'm just like, I don't know where to pin the question, right? Like my question to most of the scholars today, like whenever I do some kind of an engagement in terms of networking or conference or anything, is this, that how do we then as a country which is kind of still in that transition phase of figuring it out, both with what was and what is becoming, how do you then, how do you guys as researchers doing this kind of work are already placing your work, or what is the question that we should be asking? Where do we start? I mean, that's primarily what my dilemma is, and maybe you can help out.
Yeah, I mean, I think Devina and I are at two ends of the scholarship spectrum, right? In some ways, I'm like close to the end of my career, and she's beginning her career. And I mean, I think it's a very good question, and it's one that cannot be ignored. But it's a question that I think is pertinent to all of education, right? So, and if you think about the old debate about do you focus your resources in the classroom on the least equipped child, or do you focus your resources in the classroom on the child that is at the top of the ladder, let's say, right? I mean, gifted. So this whole debate around children with special needs and as being both gifted and children with disabilities of any kind. So clearly you can't ignore either end of the spectrum. And I would say it's the same with the digital divide, right? So of course, we cannot ignore the digital divide, and the pandemic has only shown us that it's a very real divide, and it has consequences beyond the trivial. I mean, it's not just about access to entertainment and leisure, but which are also important, but it's also about access to very basic education. So obviously, the government or or any other party that is involved in education has to address the digital divide, and we have to figure out how we create an equitable digital platform. And I think universities like Azim Premji University and others are actually looking at that side of the question. But at the same time, you have this growing population that is comfortably digital in the same way that a child in a highly resourced school in the United States or Australia or in Europe is. And that's because we live in a populous country. That's also a huge number. So you also have to address the anxieties and needs and dangers that, if you call it dangers, the challenges, let's say, that that group experiences. So, and clearly one person can't do both. So we do need more researchers, and we need researchers in all parts of this spectrum. So I wouldn't worry too much. So if you are working on something that has to do with the digitally infused society, let's say, I don't think that's any less relevant just because there exists a digital divide. So we cannot afford to wait for everybody to catch up. We want everybody to catch up, but we can't wait for everybody to catch up, because then what happens to the children who are already in that world? So yeah, it's not an easy answer, but I think it's the only way we can tackle it.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now, if I may please allow our founder, Shivani Garu, to please say a few words.
So, namaste everybody. WishwaTalks is a space to expand the horizons of our minds. It's a kind of social consciousness that we want to bring in, social change that we would like to bring in to the society around us. Each webinar, we call experts from different domains to discuss, examine opinions, issues, problems, and perspectives. Each webinar is an interactive session where we all walk away with more respect for each other and a deeper understanding about the topic in hand. Thank you so much. Thanks, Ms. Devina Sarwatay. You've been so supportive in letting us know. I myself have grandchildren, and your talk has made me realize that, yes, we can have them looking into this screen time. We can give them screen time, but let it be quality. In fact, I did that with my children, but I simply forgot about it. So I'm going to do that with my grandkids. Thank you so much. We're soon coming up with the software is being developed for WishwaTalks. We're going to come up with WishwaTalks for juniors and WishwaTalks for the youth. The idea is when your kids who can afford to go to a Rishi Valley, or eminent people from across the world come once a month and talk to these children. As you already know, WishwaTalks is free. We would like to have eminent people come and talk to young children, to inspire them, to motivate them, to show them a direction, to show them what is the right way to be a human. So this will be available for free for all schools, whether it is government, whether it is schools in any part of the country or any part of the world. We would like to make this available. Similarly for youth, so much of energy, so much of optimism. We would like them to have the right thought processes, especially in a world where social media is coming up with all kinds of opinions. We need someone to direct them in the right direction. So we'll be coming up with these two talks soon. We are also coming up with the Vishwa materials. My children used to wear on my sister's children's clothes. And these days children, my daughter, she must have bought everything from America for her children. She must have used each of the dresses for what? 3 times, 4 times? You want to give it to someone like, I've offered it to someone and like, they don't want to take it because it's below their dignity, because it's an old dress. I remember when we were small, it was okay to wear on my grandmother's dress, sari, my mother's sari, my brother's clothes or my sister's clothes. We just wore it on, it was okay. I want to bring this back into vogue. It's okay to be used clothes. It's okay to use used stuff. And we need to be a lesser burden on our environment. We need to bring back things. Let each item that has been produced on earth be completely used. So this is one more thing we're coming up with. And lastly, I'd like to go to the fundraisers that Vishwa is supporting with. Vishwa, as you know, is a crowdsourcing platform. We have a few fundraisers out here. One is Bal Vikas Education Society. We have 2 out of every 100 children in India suffer from some form of mental disability. Children with such disorders find it extremely difficult to communicate with others and function in society, and as a result, need utmost support and care during their development journey. For 14 years, Bal Vikas Education Society has helped many such children and parents of these children who needed mental growth and encouragement. Right now, Vishwa is supporting, funding salaries for 3 teachers. Each teacher can in turn support a few students. So if any of you all are willing to support the salary of a teacher or know someone who can, please help Bal Vikas. Second, we have Totapalli Zilla Parishad High School. They are trying to, it is in Kalvakarti Mandal of Nagar Karnool district. They would like to build toilets for the girl children. The total strength of the school is 226 students, of which 128 are girls and 98 are boys. Girls, I'm sure each of you understand the plights of girls when they have to use toilets, especially as they're aging, and most people even drop out from these schools. We would really like to support them with a toilet. We also have Roshni Trust. At a time when, the entire statistics are showing that every 4 minutes someone is committing suicide due to large-scale urbanization and a shift in the population moving from a family and a community-centric lifestyle to a nuclear, often lonely urban setting. Suicides around the world are on a rapid race, along with several other psychological disorders and emotional maladies. In an effort to change this situation, Roshni Trust, a Hyderabad-based mental health NGO, has been rolling out an initiative to conduct these free psychiatry camps for the underprivileged. It was founded in 1997 by a handful of caring volunteers. Roshni was started with a vision of a society in which fewer people die by suicide and more people are allowed to explore and express their feelings while acknowledging and representing the feelings of others. Roshni's primary objective has been to provide emotional support to those going through a crisis, battling depression or suicidal thoughts, or dealing with any form of mental illness or issues. We request you to donate as much as you can because every contribution counts. Please donate or send it to someone who can donate and make a difference. We also have network of Telangana people living with HIV and AIDS. We are aware that HIV has a lot of serious social ramifications. Children living with HIV have it even worse. There is a lack of general awareness about HIV that has forced children into the worst form of child labor just to support themselves. What is worse is that a large number of these children are orphans. Statistics show that nearly all the children that have HIV/AIDS were born with it. Telangana state has 2,300 children living with HIV. In an effort to give these children the right nutrition and give them back, the network of Telangana people living with HIV/AIDS, it's a society, we call it NTP. Every month they give out 100 bags of food to these children. Each bag costs 1,600 rupees. Please feel free to donate food to these unfortunate kids. Then we have another fundraiser for senior citizens. It's by Vruddha Abhaya Trust. As we all know, with urbanization, today, home for the aged is going to be a norm. Nothing wrong, nothing right, but this is what we're going to see. And we need to accept this reality and support them completely. We need to ensure as many home for the aged as possible are going to be supported. Today, for 12 years, Vruddha Abhaya Trust has been taking care of senior citizens. They provide free accommodation, medical needs, and nutritional needs. Today, they would like to ask you to donate 1 meal per day to these old people. We accept the divide, but would like to know more about what the government is doing about this, or maybe the organizations like Azim Premji.
I mean, the digital divide is, it exists on multiple levels, right? And I think it's important that we first acknowledge that. And perhaps at the base level, it is access to devices, laptops, smartphones, tablets, etc. And that is relatively simply handled. And I'm saying relatively simply handled because, of course, it takes resources and commitment. But I think you can find organizations willing to equip people with materials. What is harder to do is closing the social and cultural part of the divide. So, okay, you have a laptop, maybe you even have access to bandwidth, which is an infrastructural issue, right? I mean, you need cables laid everywhere, you need signal towers placed everywhere, and that is not a given. So it's a combination of the infrastructural, the material, and skill development. And skills are not just about, in the pandemic, we saw all of these edtech companies kind of jumping to offer coding classes for 4th graders and so on. And that's one kind of digital literacy, and it's one kind of equipping oneself for the digital world. But I think the more important questions perhaps that we need to address are issues of, how do you think of yourself, and how does living in a digital world affect self-esteem and relationship building, and your ability to seek and your ability to evaluate the material that you come across. So these are skills that are not easily developed, and they are skills that are tied to our larger education system. So I think, it's easy to give like a two-line answer, but I think they really need multiple inputs at multiple levels. And we keep coming back to the question of, if our education system can be fixed, then many of these issues related to digital literacy can also be fixed. I don't know, Devina, you want to add anything to that?
Actually, ma'am, you've said it all, and I could go on, but I think Pavandeep Kaur is back.
Okay.
And maybe you could unmute yourself now and ask your question. And we also have some popular questions, in the chat. Hi.
Hi. So my question, or rather my fear, is that these digital platforms and technology, they take up our information and use that to keep in our own loop, in our own small bubble, and that also hooks us up more. So I know it sounds like I have read and like books like 1984, let's say. So I think earlier these political systems or these leaders were like big brothers watching us. People who watch these control these leaders. But now I think this technology and these digital platforms are taking up our information, and they are using it also. And in future, I sometimes fear that they might use it to just, and we will not even be aware, you know. So I don't know what the question is, but
No,
that's my
sorry.
thought.
Go ahead, Devina.
Would like to hear your thoughts on this.
No, I completely hear your thoughts and worries and anxieties, because they are very, very valid. And it's actually another debate entirely that we haven't been able to touch on in this particular talk, because, well, we only have so much time. But that is a legitimate concern, because how do you think we get, we are browsing something online, and then suddenly when we go to our Facebook or Instagram, the same thing that we were browsing about is now appearing as a pop-up advertisement, or a sidebar scroll as an advertisement. So that's essentially social media marketing. What they're doing is they're retargeting. So they are collecting data, and they're customizing and personalizing to cater to your particular needs, thinking, oh, you looked up, I don't know, certain earrings. So maybe we should keep telling you to buy those earrings and subliminally send you messages or even discount offers. And yes, you're right, these are concerns, which is sort of what we hinted on when we spoke about, when Usha ma'am spoke about designing. And when I spoke about how big tech companies and social media companies need to have child-centered design at the core of any product that they are offering children and adolescents. And that's actually a complaint that a lot of my participants had, and their parents had, that these are not necessarily platforms that were built for young people, but young people are using them. These are not necessarily platforms that were built for Indian children, but Indian children are using them. And to kind of go back to a talk that I attended yesterday that was also given by another student of Usha ma'am's, Ms. Anuja Premika, who's also a PhD scholar at the department. She spoke about Instagram filters and how these don't necessarily fit, our color, our faces, the way we look. Are they trying to kind of say that there's only one kind of face that's acceptable, or one kind of beauty that's acceptable? So yes, these are larger questions that we need to engage with as critical scholars or people who think about safeguarding our children's rights in the digital world.
Yeah, and it's the debate between convenience and privacy, right? I mean, and surveillance. So how many of us read the small print before you sign on to Facebook or Instagram or whatever? And that's by design, right? The platforms count on your not reading the small print, just like any other marketing device. So I think, how we think about our privacy, what we're willing to give up in order to get free access to things. These are things we have to, it has to become part of the public discourse. And so far, we've let technology companies get away with it because people didn't realize that these were questions that we would have to address. I mean, they said, oh, wow, Facebook is free, let's just get onto it. And it's a wonderful way of keeping in touch with people. And then now, after the whole Congress hearings, Francis Haugen talking about how Facebook had research that showed that young teenage girls were ending up with severe self-esteem issues because of their presence on Instagram and watching other people on Instagram. So I think this also relates to a question that was asked in the chat around identity and anonymity. And I think all of these questions we need to address as a society. They cannot become personal choices, right? Okay, I care about my privacy, so I'm not going to go on Facebook. Maybe a very difficult choice to make if you're a young person and all the other 15-year-olds are on Facebook. So do you make the choice to not keep up with your friends? Or do you say, that's fine, I'll just join my friends and to hell with privacy? So I think these are questions that we need to hold technology companies responsible for. And it's a tough choice, right? I mean, do you want regulation that makes things difficult for us to access anything at all? Do we prefer surveillance from the government, or do we prefer surveillance from corporate actors? So these are all, they're not questions that individual scholars can address or individual people can address. And I think what we need to do is to make these part of our public conversations. Yeah.
Also, just to add a little bit to, I think maybe I haven't been saying it as much as I should have. We really need to have children's voices come to the fore. What are their experiences? What are their practices? And to kind of quote one of my participants, who was, I think, a 13-year-old at the time of the interview, she said that, oh, but I know that all of this is a trade-off. I know that if the app is free, that I am the product. So maybe it's a very well-informed choice that they're making.
If I may add a little bit, if you don't mind, to this. As Usha ma'am had said, we were all very happy when Facebook was free and WhatsApp is still free. And by no means am I taking anything away from the blame that rightfully belongs to these tech companies. But we've known this saying for many, many years that there's no such thing as a free lunch. Yet when something is offered free to us, we do not question anything. And we have to also understand that on a larger picture, that it's not them or us, it is us as a species that is in this together. And as anything does, it takes time for us to understand what it is, the fire that we have set, and what it's going to do to us, and what it's going to do to the world around us. And if I may ask, we are complaining and saying how, one of the audience members has said, how clear or how legible is the legality or the terms and conditions. Ma'am, may I ask you, sir, sorry, when you get a pop-up on WhatsApp saying terms and conditions are updated, how much time do you take to actually go through it line by line? So I think the responsibility is mutual, right? We can take them to task, these behemoths, and say, you are making a product out of me, but it is also your responsibility to take back ownership of your own rights and spend that time to understand what has been changed, because now by law they are required to highlight the changes for you.
But this also reminds me of battles in other spaces, like food labeling, for instance. And it's taken a long time for us to be able to get consumable manufacturers to put on their packaging in very clear, easily understandable terms. The ingredients, or even now they're not perfect, but at least we've come some way. And I think similarly with any kind of legal documentation, I mean, it needs people in between to say, okay, you need to not just have this 20-page terms and conditions and find in 8-point font, right? You need to have them presented in a way that different stakeholders can understand. So if you're designing technology for children, then maybe they get a pop-up window which is graphic, which is done like a graphic comic, and allows them to understand exactly what they're getting into. And not just for children, I mean, for many of us also, I think a legal contract that is a graphic contract would be much easier to understand, and we'd be willing to engage with it. So I agree that it is our responsibility to be informed, but then that information should be in a way that can be easily digestible. So yeah, it's a two-way street.
And to just sort of add to what Usha ma'am said, that yes, there is that certain sense of individual responsibility which stems from being literate about these choices. But at the end of the day, how much change do you expect an individual to effect when those decisions are not necessarily based on that individual, right? Which means that you need, in a certain way, government to step in, advocacy organizations and other organizations to step in and say, hey, this is not done, which in a way what is happening in Europe. We have the GDPR, which takes care of a lot of these things. Of course, there are complaints with that kind of regulation as well, where a lot of researchers might have problems with navigating how to go about conducting research that might actually hinder instead of help the original thought behind it. But I guess, we are always, as Amy Orbin puts it, always going to be outpaced by technology. So how do we work around that? I guess I'd like to quote Marietta Shake on that, who's part of the EU leadership and all of these regulations were being formed. She says maybe we need to start thinking about principles and basic rights, which we cannot, no matter what, do away with.
Infringe, yes.
We cannot infringe. They are like a must. They're to do, and design things around this.
Can I add a little to this? It's the government's role to ensure the rules are regulated. And of late, there was one rule which came up where most of these apps were just about renewing their subscription every month. You like an app, you choose it for a month, and you don't like it and you forget about it. But you see that app is collecting money from your bank account every month. So recently the government came up saying you should take consent. So yes, we have a government which is trying, but we also need a citizenship, the citizens of the country demanding for it. An awareness where, people like you and me and each of the participants, if we know people who have a better knowledge of this subject, maybe a lawyer, should come and bring in awareness about, yes, this is the problem, but how do we solve it? Let awareness be built. Definitely the government will take action. Yeah. So shall I go to the next question?
Yeah, I think there's a question that Divya, it's more of a comment that Divya Tatikonda posted. And she says, this conflict between how do parents engage with children in a way that weans them away from screens. And I was just beginning to write in the chat, but maybe I can just say it. I think a lot of the anxiety about screen time, again, I'm talking about a certain set of parents, not all parents, comes from a sense of guilt as well, right? So if you're a young mother, in an urban space, you've got a 2-year-old that's screaming for attention, you have to handle the household, you have to manage your work. Okay, you plonk the child in front of an iPad, and it's easy. It's an easy babysitter, right? And before you know it, the iPad becomes the center of the child's focus and attention, and it's difficult to wean the child away from that screen. So, and one doesn't blame the young mother or the young parent, in that situation at all, because these are larger circles of care, right, that we all end up finding ourselves in. But then if we know, if we're educated as parents that, yes, the technology by design is addictive, that's a fraught word, but let's say, yes, it is addictive. And we know that using it as a substitute for parental attention is going to be dangerous, then maybe we'll think twice about it. So to use the screen as a substitute for parental attention is problematic. But to use the screen as a complement to all the stimulation that an individual parent or a household can provide is a different thing. So I think we need to think about how we are employing the screens in relation to our parenting practices, and then see to what extent we are responsible for whatever comes out of it. So yes, work. So again, it's a big cycle, Divya. I mean, I think, challenge for parents in given work pressures. Why do we submit to these work pressures? Why do we agree that it's okay for us to be contacted by the office at 7 o'clock in the evening? So it's not just about screens. Like I said, it's a much bigger conversation we need to have about what sort of lives do we want to lead? What sort of relationship do we want to have with the world and with each other? So the screens just become like a bookmark for all of these other anxieties. So I think I know that I'm giving you this big philosophical answer, but I think it is, that is the way we need to think about it. Maybe it's no answer at all, I'm sorry. But I see it's already 12:20 almost, so maybe we should close, if you don't mind. And I mean, this is a great conversation, and it's given Devina and me many things to think about, if we're going to do any media literacy work. These are all very good inputs to keep in mind. So, yeah.
Thank you once again for taking your time to have these conversations.